Hello all, welcome to the show. I'm Gus Gagliardi and this is Fire Code Tech. On Fire Code Tech, we interview fire protection professionals from all different careers and backgrounds in order to provide insight and a resource for those in the field. My goal is to help you become a more informed fire protection professional. Fire Code Tech has interviews with engineers and researchers, fire marshals, and insurance professionals, and highlights topics like codes and standards, engineering systems, professional development, and trending topics in the industry. So if you're someone who wants to know more about fire protection or the fascinating stories of those who are in the field, you're in the right place. Hello all, welcome to episode 38 of Fire Code Tech. In this episode, we're talking to Will Smith. Will is one of my very good friends from college, and in this episode, we talk about his career, which has been mostly in nuclear fire protection. So he's worked for a variety of companies that deal with fire protection and facilities kind of maintenance and inspection, testing, and maintenance for nuclear facilities. This was actually the first episode ever recorded of Fire Code Tech, and I waited for a while because my initial thoughts were I didn't really know what I was doing. I didn't, have my interview flow down. And so Will was very kind in order to be a guinea pig and help me try this thing out that I had been wanting to do for about a year at this time. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Will has some great insight about his career, and he's a very smart guy. Also, don't forget to follow us on social media and subscribe so you never miss an episode. Let's dive into the show. Hello, how's it going, William? Welcome to Fire Code Tech.
Hey, thanks for having me, Gus.
Cool. Well, just to get into the podcast, I just wanted to ask, Will, how did you get into fire protection?
I got into fire protection because my father is a fire protection engineer. Originally, I thought I wanted to be an electrical engineer, and then I was browsing through some electrical engineering books one day and saw that they were full of math. So I asked my dad how much math electrical engineers had to do, and he said all of it. I asked him how much math did he have to do, and he said not as much. So I told him to help me more about fire protection.
That's pretty good. I like that. It seems like people in fire protection oftentimes have an interesting path of getting into the field, and so I like to hear about that sort of stuff. So you said your dad was in fire protection. So what did your dad do?
He started his career in system design, and so he did that for a while back when it was all pipe schedule system kind of stuff. And then he ended up going over to the nuclear industry. He got wind of some gig where they needed somebody who was proficient in design, and he jumped on that. And from there, ended up working on Department of Energy nuke stuff at their national labs. And he ended up working straight for the Department of Energy and spent his whole career in there and retired from that.
Cool. Very cool. That's awesome. So I wanted to ask you, I saw that you've had a lot of internships, and I imagine some people who are listening to this will, be in school or, working on getting into the fire protection industry. So I was wondering if you could just walk me through some of your internships and tell me a little bit about your essentially pre-full-time job out of school experience.
Sure. Yeah, I started off, I was working retail and stuff, and then was starting to go to college and it locked down that I wanted to do this fire protection thing. And pretty quickly learned that a lot of stuff is connections. My dad knew some people who knew of a program that DOE ran for interns, and he said, "Hey, you should go throw your name in the hat." And so I did, and I ended up working in not in fire protection at all. I was in a facility management position. I ended up working in a facility management group, and so even though that wasn't related to fire protection, it was still kind of interesting. I ended up working for them when they ended up discovering asbestos in one of their primary buildings. And so my whole summer got turned into this
Oh,
asbestos
wow.
abatement program, but kind of seeing that whole side of stuff for the whole summer. So that ended up being an interesting experience, even though it wasn't fire protection. And then after that, I was near the Oak Ridge National Laboratory, and so learned that they were doing internships, and again just kind of threw my name in that, and they ended up putting me in their fire department, and I spent one summer and then stayed on after the summer, and came through the fall, and then came back the next summer. I guess they liked me or something, and so I ended up working in the fire department as an intern, doing just kind of shadowing some IT&M stuff, inspection, testing, maintenance, and that kind of side of things. And then my last internship
Very cool.
was uh, actually, again, not quite even fire protection related. I ended up going to a career fair at school and just kind of talking to a lot of people, doing some interviews, and got asked by Valero to go do a safety internship. And so that all was actually safety and industrial hygiene related. Um, so I never actually ended up having a straight fire protection engineering kind of internship.
That's funny. That's funny. And for the people who don't know, well, where'd you end up going to school?
I got my degree in fire protection at Oklahoma State University.
Cool. Yeah, and that's where we met,
That's
and
right.
that's where we were lab partners, and that's kind of all where it
That's where you
began.
got me
But
through college.
yeah, no, no, no way. You were the smart one for sure. So like in our program, there's kids who lean towards the safety side of things, and then there's students who are more interested in sort of the fire protection side of things. So when you were in school, what was your, experience? Where did you see yourself ending up after school?
So yeah, that's a great question because there was definitely a lot of different ideas that different students had about what they wanted to do. I know where we went, Oklahoma State University, there was plenty of students that just want to be a firefighter. You know, they were getting a degree. A lot of
Yeah.
fire departments want you to have a degree in something nowadays, and so for a lot of them, that was the goal. Some wanted fire marshal kind of things, and then you definitely had the groups of people that wanted to go into design. Out there in Oklahoma, I think there was a lot of people that wanted to go into oil and gas. I knew I always wanted to end up in the nuclear
Hmm.
industry just because that's what my dad had spent his whole career in. We'd ended up out in East Tennessee, where there is a lot of DOE nuke stuff in that kind of half the United States. And so I thought that would be a good niche to get into. I didn't end up getting into like DOE nuke right away. I ended up going into commercial nuke right out of college, working at a nuclear power plant. So it was just kind of what I knew. And so I guess I just kind of ended up going that direction. But I remember being the only kid when people talk about where they wanted to end up, you'd hear oil and gas, insurance, design, whatever it was. And I think
Yeah.
I was the one person who was like, oh, I want to go into nuke.
That's really interesting. Yeah, I think that's funny because yeah, most kids are, the large majority of jobs are in safety or in
Yeah.
insurance or fire protection. So it's you people only know what you grew up with. I mean, I think it's funny. I ended up being an engineer, but my dad was an engineer, and so I think it's interesting that
Yeah, like I said earlier, it's
people.
kind of that connections thing that helps when you're finding a job, but even just knowing where to look and what's out there, a lot of the times, I mean, you don't know what you don't know. And a lot of times you're not going to know these things unless somebody tells you. And so, why does anyone become an engineer? Why does, in such a small field as fire protection, kind of a niche field, how does anybody end up in that? Almost everybody had a story of how they ended up even hearing about it in the first place.
Yeah, for sure. It's definitely extremely niche and extremely tight knit as far as it all goes. So, you know, so when you started in the fire protection industry, what's one of the more difficult things about you started learning about your job, or what was one of the more difficult parts of getting into fire protection as a professional? Was there anything you struggled with? Or, I can think of some specific design related tasks that were hard for me starting out. Was there anything that you remember thinking when you were first getting into the industry? Oh man, this is really hard or difficult, or I don't quite get this yet?
I think there's kind of a general sense of getting out of college and kind of having that anxiety of thinking I was going to land in a professional field and somebody was going to expect me to know something. You just spent 4 years in college, you're going to show up at this job and they're going to expect you to know something. I was kind of relieved to find that right out the gate, everybody kind of typically expects you to know nothing. I think you got to spend
Yeah,
4 years in school proving that you can learn. And then once you've kind of proven you can learn, and especially in these engineering fields, they want to know that you can learn quickly, adapt quickly, process stuff quickly, and then kind of got out and had a base in fire protection. But as for something in particular that was difficult to learn, it takes some time to kind of get your feet planted in the codes, NFPA and IBC. You know,
sure.
you kind of get an overview in college of some of them, and then kind of coming out, you end up having to dig through a lot of these things. And so I don't know. I've spent a lot of my few years here out of college in kind of code compliance uh, positions, running fire protection programs, doing a lot of kind of code compliance sort of stuff, and so we're in the code a lot, and just kind of learning to navigate that and such. It just took some time. I think.
For sure, yeah. I definitely can resonate with that. We had experience with, codes and standards in school, but there's nothing like the reps and the, sets that you get in being a professional and just going through the motions on a day-to-day basis, looking at, nobody's going to know the code better than the sprinkler designer or the fire alarm designer that looks at that book every
Mm.
day. So there's definitely some tips and tricks in there. And yeah, I feel like that one of the big ones for me was learning just how the format of the NFPA standards, how there's consistency in them and how that's something easy to fall back on anytime you're looking at them. Like going to the introduction and reading, does this standard even apply? Or going into, the building codes and seeing, is this standard even adopted by the building codes and that sort of thing. So I definitely resonate with
Yeah,
that, with what you're saying. So
absolutely. There is reason to the madness in the code books.
yeah, yeah, it seems daunting at first for sure. It seems like their own language. So cool. So can you take me through what a normal day at your job looks like? Like what is that? I mean, people here, facilities engineer or for campus of buildings that are involved with nuclear facilities. What does that mean? What does that functionally look like?
So, everywhere you're going to end up in fire protection, and, there's a lot of places that you can end up. Like we've kind of mentioned, I mean, some people go into the safety side, some people are in the design side, and even the different industries you end up in are all going to be different. In my little niche of the world, this kind of Department of Energy, nuclear facility kind of world, and what I also did in commercial nuke comes down to running a fire protection program. So there's regulations in place that say you've got to run a fire protection program, you've got to do it this way, and you've got to do these things. And for my particular position now, in kind of this DOE nuke position, um, there's a set of uh, regulations that flow down to orders that kind of flow down to DOE standards, and they end up basically telling us you've got to run a program like this and you've got to do these things. And one of those big things is you've got to get into all your facilities and you've got to do fire protection engineering assessments, they call them, on the facilities, where you kind of go through, and it's not a line by line code review, but it is a assessment to make sure that the building is in compliance with your program, with your fire protection program at your site. And so I spend a lot of my time doing that. We are on a rather large campus with many buildings, and so I'm always kind of prepping for an assessment and working on my report, doing a lot of my research on this facility, and then doing a walk down, getting out into the field, putting eyes on everything, and then coming back and kind of finishing up a report and getting it reviewed and moving on to the next one. And then beyond that, I also support just a part of the facility as kind of a point of contact in fire protection engineering, so that if they have any questions, they always have somebody they can contact. And that's kind of a revolving door on my office of other fun things that come up.
Cool. So you talk about a report a little bit. What kind of things is this? A hazard assessment? Is this? Are you looking at annual maintenance? What kind of things are you looking at on this
This thing
report?
starts with a description of the building at the facility, works through the water supply available to the facility, the fire protection systems, both suppression and alarm that are in there. It touches on the fire department response. It goes through all the IT&M that's needed for the systems, if it's in compliance, and it goes through all the life safety stuff from emergency lights, exits. And the walkthrough confirms that a lot of that stuff is in action and uh, in compliance in the field. It's very comprehensive. Uh,
Hmm.
just kind of making sure that every element of our program is actually being carried out in the facility.
I'm sure that fire sprinkler
Yeah.
and fire alarm are very common for your facilities. Are there other types of fire protection systems
Well, we've
that
got a whole host of systems, and so we have a lot of. In some cases, we have really unique kind of applications, and we end up having a whole gamut of systems. Everything from we've got your standard kind of wet pipe, dry pipe, and a lot of kind of antifreeze loops. Even though we're trying to get away from that,
Oh wow,
and yeah, just
cool.
kind of a little bit of everything. Just with kind of the size of the facility, and we end up just kind of being a whole small city and
Wow.
manufacturing and kind of everything all in one. Uh, and
And so for
a lot of these
sorry,
are
go on.
really old, and so you can be dealing with stuff from back in the 40s all the way up to stuff that was installed yesterday. So you end up seeing kind of a wide gambit of stuff.
Cool. Very cool. That's always one of the things that I brag about when I talk about fire protection to people in other jobs or industries is how varied the work we get to do is with new construction and existing construction and different system types and all that sort of thing. So I always find that that's the spice that makes the job interesting and meaningful to come back to.
Absolutely, you can see a lot of history as you go out and look at some of these old systems and stuff that's in place.
That's super neat. That's super neat. So, oh yeah, I remember what I wanted to ask. I wanted to ask you about. So you're talking about antifreeze systems. Have you seen any of this? I forget who the company is, but they just released a UL listed antifreeze. Have you seen anything about that? I thought that was
I
interesting.
haven't. You'd have to tell me about it.
Oh, it's not a big deal, but before there was not a listed antifreeze
Hmm.
solution due to all the trouble they've had with
Oh yeah,
people mixing the antifreeze on site and charging these systems. But now I can't quite remember who. I'm sure I could look it up real quick, but yeah, they have a listed antifreeze now, which I feel like could be a game changer for keeping some of these more antiquated systems in service.
yeah, yeah. I mean, because I know as far as for us, we end up trying to remove a lot of them. That's kind of the goal. When the opportunity arises, we'd rather just remove it, get it out of place. And I think there's even some. Isn't there kind of a deadline for getting some of these systems out?
I think there is, but it
I have
shows
to look.
that Tyco has a UL listed antifreeze, so that's kind of interesting. But yeah, I imagine that people are still hesitant to use the systems. If there's only one person who's manufacturing the listed antifreeze, I'm sure it's still not ideal.
Yeah,
Um,
especially
so, especially in what?
when you have other options.
Definitely, definitely. So. In talking to you before, you were telling me that you work with, you guys have a rather large fire protection division. Can you tell me about that a little bit?
We do. We have probably about a half a dozen guys who work on these fire protection engineering assessments, and then we have probably two or three guys that are dedicated to writing FHAs. Um, and so, I mean, it's a pretty large group, and we definitely have enough work to keep everybody busy. But it's definitely the largest group of fire protection engineers I've ever worked in.
That's awesome. That's really cool. It's always nice to have people who are knowledgeable around you and helping you learn and mentorship and that sort of thing. So,
Absolutely. I benefit from as
and
the youngest member of the group. I get to not worry about being the smartest person in the room and instead get to just ask these guys for their wisdom.
that's super nice. That's always very meaningful. I know that when we were in school, we had teachers telling us to pick a job for your mentors and don't just be locked in on how much money you can make. So I always found that to be solid
Yeah.
advice. Um, cool. Well, to give people some idea of the magnitude of the campus that you work on, like approximately how many buildings do you guys take a look at in a year? Do you have to evaluate all the buildings on your campus in like in 1 year's time?
So buildings that are nuclear facilities, they have to be evaluated every year. But facilities that aren't, and we have a lot, as there's a lot of support buildings for these, um, they get an evaluation every 3 years. It all just
Wow.
falls out from the DOE orders on how to run and manage a fire protection program for their facilities. So I mean, if I had to guess, I'd say we probably end up doing about uh, 30 or 40 assessments a year. And that kind of gets
Wow.
amongst the group. Um, if 30 might be a good number, I'll go with that.
That's
Yeah.
awesome. That's a lot of buildings. That's a lot of buildings to be,
Typically,
part of a program.
yeah, typically most guys have one a month. And so you just kind of start the month working through it and one a month or one every other month.
So you've talked to me before about kind of your relationship with the as or would you consider yourself an authority having jurisdiction? Or I remember speaking with you before, you telling me that you kind of function as a pseudo AHJ, but not really an AHJ.
Yeah, so our group, we don't do any of the design work. We have a separate group that does the fire protection design stuff. And so we are kind of in that code authority position. And so for this part of the site that I oversee, I become kind of the pseudo AHJ. I am out there in the field. I answer the questions and whatnot. And how that role kind of falls out for us is DOE has a person on site, a DOE official on site who is the AHJ. And but then as the contractor for the site, the whole site is run by under a contract, and there's just a handful of DOE people there. And so then within the contract, you have our contractor authority having jurisdiction, and there's kind of a world of things that he's allowed to just kind of give his approval on, and if it kind of goes above that line, then he has to touch base with the DOE AHJ. And so we're then the fire protection engineers like myself, we're out in the field and we get involved in those situations. And if we need a AHJ approval, then we would just go to the AHJ on our staff and ask him to look something over. So he kind of say
Cool.
so. It's just kind of a flow down like that.
Interesting. That's an interesting structure. How you guys are kind of tight knit, but also you use a structure of command or kind of chain of command type of thing to working with the on-site AHJ and working as a AHJ yourself. Very cool. So, are there any like trends or themes in the industry that you see right now for your job where like for my industry, the architecture and engineering field and design side of things, I can see that the way that contracts are handled are shifting more towards the design build side of things, away from the design bid build process, and that's kind of a trend in our industry. And but I didn't know if you could think of anything specifically that you feel is trending in your job position, or something that's yeah, of that nature.
I really can't think of anything that's really kind of trending in my corner of the world, but could also just be because I'm relatively new. I feel like, everything just seems new to me. I'm sure if you ask somebody who was older on the staff, they would tell you how everything's wildly changing these days.
Sure, sure. So what's one thing that you wish you would have known, um, getting into the fire protection field, that you know now but you didn't know when you got into the field?
I it's kind of hard for me to say. I had a pretty good base with my father being, in the very similar field to me where I'm at now. So I always had somebody I could kind of
Sure,
bounce things off of. Uh,
sure.
I I haven't had anything that I really felt like, was too, something that I really wish I knew beforehand that I missed out on.
Yeah,
Um, just probably what I mentioned earlier, that kind of stress of when I first kind of stepped out of college and feeling like, I needed to be this productive member of society right away. And while you should always strive to be that, I think most people understand that for your first 2 years, you're pretty much in training. They're teaching you what they want you to know.
sure. Definitely. Yeah, I think it's so hard, especially for a young professional starting to work in the field, and you get into the job and you're gung ho and you want to charge into the problems and start really getting into the mix. And the reality of it is it's going to take, days and weeks and months before you get properly integrated in the way that your company does business and the workflow of how things get done. So it's a very, it's stressful, but honestly, it's one of the more easier parts of your career, but it's very stressful because you don't understand how you fit in the equation yet. And I can see the struggle in young professionals, young engineers that work at my company. They want to be involved, they want to learn, they want to get into the problems, but they're just not they're just not acclimated into how things are done yet. So yeah, I that's something that I definitely think about. How can I help, young professionals get acclimated, or how could what would you say to somebody, getting into the field and, get acclimated? And for me, it's, understand where your resources are, understand your codes, understand your, international building code or whatever your jurisdiction is important, because those are going to be your bread and butter questions as a fire protection engineer.
Absolutely.
Um,
I would recommend that somebody, take the opportunity in their early career when uh, they may have more time. It may not be as laden down with tasks to take every opportunity to learn. No time you ever spend getting more familiar with your codes, getting more familiar with the regulations that drive the work you do. Um, whether that be like in my industry, the regulations and the DOE orders and the DOE standards and whatnot. Um, no time ever spent learning that material and learning what drives your job position and learning your resources, your code and whatnot is ever going to be uh, a waste. Time,
Definitely.
get into the procedures, get into the code, get into the regulations and whatnot, and kind of learn that document base. It's going to always serve you well.
Yeah. Yeah, one of the more grueling things I ever had to do, on the entry into a job is, just have my assignment be to just sit down and read the code book. And, it sounds, unproductive or cruel, or it's like, just takes forever, but read NFPA 13 or NFPA 72 cover to cover,
Yeah,
sounds like torture, but like you said, there's not a moment you spend reading one of these code books that isn't helping you put a base layer of, understanding on that will help you in your career for sure.
absolutely.
For sure. So, can you think of are you interested in any online resources, or is there anybody you follow in social media or anything like that for fire protection news or fire protection information?
No, I'm probably behind in keeping up with fire protection information. Yeah, online resources that I use, the code books hosted, the NFPA has online. They're nice to be able to have access to all those and multiple editions of those. You kind of run into needing that sometimes. And um, any other resources that I use, not really, not online. It doesn't feel like there's a whole lot of stuff out there. It doesn't feel like that, fire protection as an industry kind of has a whole lot of resources and material online. Um, or spaces for people to kind of get together and bounce ideas off of each other. We have a local chapter of SFPE, and that's helpful where you can get to know more fire protection engineers and kind of develop those connections of people who've had different experiences that you can call up and bounce questions off of. So for me, that it's kind of the general resource I end up going to. We I fortunately work with quite a few engineers and then know several more that I can always kind of take those questions to.
That's good. I mean, there's no better resource than a person who's done it before. But yeah, I think one of my favorite ones that I like to use a lot is Meyer Fire. And
Oh yeah,
have you read much of his blog articles or anything
yeah.
like that?
I've been in there from time to time and been linked several of his articles at least.
Yeah, he just had a new one come out. I think this week that he broke down all the requirements in the International Building Code that talk about when a sprinkler system was required, and he put it all on a cheat sheet. So, I mean, if that would have existed when I was first getting into the sprinkler industry, I would have been like, "Wow, this is so great,"
Yeah,
But it's nice that people are just starting to, generate these things and kind of have these conversations and make it a little easier for us.
absolutely.
So, Will, can you think of any times where you've had like a failure or a pain point where you ended up learning from it, or maybe something that one of your engineering coworkers caught, or something where you thought, "Oh man, that's I can't believe I missed that," or something like to that nature
Oh
that helped you learn, or something you always remember?
yeah, that happens all the time. One of my largest pain points so far was when I was in commercial nuke. We were uh, having our triennial inspection where our regulator comes in once every 3 years and kind of does a big program review, and they're always looking for something to write you up on. And we felt like we've been doing a pretty good job, and we have them come in and they're asking for information on all these specific areas, and we're giving it to them. We're answering questions, and we're like, yeah, this is going to go pretty well. This is going to go pretty well, and without getting down into the details, we kind of had a grid system, and we thought we had everything kind of tested the way we needed to. We were testing all parts of it, and they ended up coming in and saying we were missing something, and we strongly disagreed. And so we kind of went back and forth, and uh, we were able to point to the code and go, look, here's what it says. Here's how we're meeting that. We're not really seeing the gap, and it kind of came down to not a code issue, but a preference issue. And
Mm,
we didn't feel like a preference issue should get written up as a violation. and so, or a finding, whatever you want to call it. And so, regulator came through and they wrote it up as a finding, and so we got pinned with that. And of course, our management's coming and going, "Why are we having this finding? You know what's going on?" So we're explaining what's going on and our position and their position, and and this is just, within the first year of me being out of school. And I'm like, boom, we've got this. Here's the code. Here's, the reality. This is, we got this one in the bag. And, and we were like, we have to go, fight on this. And we gave the whole pitch to our management, and they said, nah, take it. Just shut up and take it. And I was
Yep.
blown away. I was like, but we don't have it. We are in the right. And they said, we don't care. Shut up and take it. This works. If that's going to be the finding, they're going to walk away with what. And in the end, it's probably a good call. If that's the finding, they're going to walk away with, not a big deal. We can resolve that really easily. They felt like they came in and got us on something, and we all move on. But it was kind of a pain point because I did a lot of the research. I did a lot of the legwork on putting this case together. Just knew I'd put together just this watertight case, that this was a preference issue, not a code issue. And ended up being told that's nice. Just let them write as a finding. We're not going to fight them on it. It was a bit of a pain point.
Yeah, definitely. That's one of those things that you never forget, and it always sticks with you in your career, but it probably makes you stronger.
Yeah,
Yeah.
every bit of it was a good learning experience.
Yeah. For me, I can think of more than a couple times where my design, or my intent for a design is, it caused me some pain. And mostly a lot of times, like you say, it stems from the authority having jurisdiction, and preferences or local ordinances. Something that a student out of school, or maybe even some design professionals might not know, is that each city, each state has their own local ordinances, and they can be very impactful. So, like for Oklahoma, their state fire marshal has an ordinance that essentially says that if you place any major component of a antiquated or deficient fire alarm system, that you have to upgrade the entire facility's fire alarm system. So I've had that get me in trouble before. Oh, we're not touching this portion of the facility, and the facility was renovated in 2012. And then it ends up coming back that depending on whoever reviewed it last time, that they didn't see it last time, or it didn't go to that state fire marshal last time, and this time it comes down the line that that's something that they are want to happen, and all you can do is just say okay, and you're the authority to having jurisdiction, and you have the last word, and take care of it.
Absolutely, yeah.
So that's always those can be hard pills to swallow, though,
It
even though when it's the right thing to do.
Yeah, it can be. We ran into that in, especially my last job where we had the regulator, and we had to, you know, when they said jump, we said how high, and to some extent where we are now, we have our customer, Department of Energy, and they're the authority having jurisdiction, and when they come in and they say, nope, we want it done this way, you're like, okay, we'll throw Plan A out the window. How'd you want it done?
Yep, that's interesting. That's very interesting. I like that. That's awesome, man. I can't tell you, it means a lot to me that you come on and talk to me about the podcast stuff. I've been spinning my wheels on this for a while, so it means a lot to
I'm
me.
excited about it, and I'm excited to help and assist or be a part of as much as I can, or you want me to. Or,
Yeah,
uh, I think it's a good thing. I think it's a fun thing, and I think it's a great.
yeah. Thanks for listening, everybody. Be sure to share the episode with a friend if you enjoyed it. Don't forget that fire protection and life safety is serious business. The views and opinions expressed on this podcast are by no means a professional consultation or a codes and standards interpretation. Be sure to contact a licensed professional if you are getting involved with fire protection and or life safety. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.